basically the idea was on restricted mode, which was a mode that you could activate. A lot of our videos wouldn't show up at all. They were completely restricted, essentially saying this is not appropriate for young people.
Welcome to the Digital Voices Creator Behind the Influence podcast. I'm Jenny Quigley-Jones, the CEO of Digital Voices, and today I'm joined by one of my favorite people in the creator industry. Honestly, the absolute excellent Rowan Ellis, who is an educated author as of recently, published author now, and her cats, which are going to play in the background.
They are
great. And an LGBT plus video essayist, activist, just all of the good things in the world.
All of the things, so many things. Yeah.
You want to introduce yourself properly?
I mean, you did a pretty good job. I mean, back at Jenny is the kind of person that I will talk to people about because I just assume that they know who you are, because you, ever since we met when I was doing a Women on YouTube workshop and you just wandered in when you were working at YouTube, just off the cuff, like, oh, what's going on in here? And then I've been obsessed with you ever since. So I'm very, very excited to be here. Yeah, I just have a new book coming out, Here in Queer, which is a nonfiction sort of guide to life for queer girls and women. But as my day job at the moment, I do YouTube videos, mainly long form about LGBTQ plus, like pop culture, history, activism, all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm just started doing the full-time thing. Technically, you could say at the beginning of this week, because I left my job at Penguin a year ago, pretty much exactly a year ago, but they didn't replace me until this week fully. So I've just been vaguely working for them. It's been a very long notice period, very long downtime period, but it's been quite nice to like not just have to make the jump into full-time creator and then be like, okay, go, it's just you now. It's kind of been a slow burn, as it were.
So gradual,
very gradual, yes.
From working in corporate life. Did it take a really long time for them to find someone to replace you?
Well, they split my job into two different people's jobs, which I feel like is both flattering and irritating, in that I'm like, oh, you mean I could have either been doing less work or get paid twice as much? Okay, sure. So yeah, no, it's very interesting. But I also think like I was working specifically within teen publishing, and because of TikTok, that has like massively exploded. And so I think that it was kind of an opportunity for them to decide that they wanted to put more money into it and to kind of create like move to new platforms, like all that kind of stuff as well. So it kind of made sense, but it was, yeah, very flattering in a weird way at the same time.
So you have been running your channel officially for like 8 years.
Yes.
But how long of that have you been creating consistent content for? Has it been the whole time?
No. So I started to make kind of just dribs and jabs of content. So YouTube just used to be the place that I would just dump any old stuff. So there's a load of, clearly deleted and unlisted videos and private videos that were just, videos of dance routines or like things like that were just for me and friends, because it was like back when, right at the beginning, when YouTube was not so much of like a place you went to search for stuff. It was just kind of a place people went to upload things, and you kind of accidentally stumbled upon things that went viral or were interesting or weird or funny. And so for a long time that was that. And then I also had a period where I was very into video responses, back when they were kind of not the sort of 2014 to 2016 like SJW takedown video response type things. It was much more of like a you would have the actual video response capability, and you would genuinely like continue a conversation with someone.
It was like comment video responses, right?
It was great. It's really frustrating because up until all the stuff happened where it got really dodgy, I fully was like, yeah, video responses are the thing that YouTube should bring back. They were so fun, they were so nice, and I feel like I had maybe like the rose tinted glasses on, that everyone would just be lovely and like polite and just, continue fun conversations with each other, which is not what happened.
Actually happened with the product.
Yeah. So I did a lot of that for a while. Again, not thinking anyone would see them. It wasn't like for an audience. It was much more just like, it was like, having a conversation in the comments. But I think at that point, YouTube was still a lot of people making videos on their webcams, and the like quality was like terrible. And so it didn't really matter because it was just, like a conversation. And then I sort of didn't make anything for a while, and I did my my undergrad degree, went and got my master's. And at the end of my master's, I was like, I quite enjoyed doing research and like writing these long essays and all this kind of stuff. But I hate having to write bibliographies. I think essentially that was what really, I was like, where can I do a lot of research to write a big script and not have to do a bibliography? Oh, YouTube. It was either medium.com. Yeah, just something like that. So not having to pay for another degree. So that was kind of what started that. But at the time, like video essays, the style that I do, which is very long, just wasn't really a thing. It was very much like, you know, the Vlogbrothers were doing these 4-minute videos, and that was kind of seen as like the gold standard. Like at most you might go to 10 minutes, but like who's going to watch a 10-minute YouTube video? It just wasn't done. And so I definitely see how my content has been shaped by the norms on the platform. In terms, which I think for a lot of creators, and especially when you're a full-time creator, you want to be able to put your all into something and create something that you're really proud of, but you also don't want to be stupid about it and make something which you know that the audience is not particularly interested in or primed for. And I think at the time, like no one was going to be watching a video that was like an hour and a half long, because you would just assume that it wasn't worth it. You would be like, well, I can watch all of these TV shows that are like half an hour long and it's like a full-on comedy with production value and all that kind of stuff. So instead I was making things that were maybe like 10 minutes long, and I always could feel myself getting maybe slightly frustrated with the fact that I knew that I could do more with that time. Like I knew that these topics deserved longer, and I was kind of hemming myself into doing something that didn't really have the room to explore something deeply. It was having to say a lot very quickly, and I really did try and pack a punch within that 10-minute script. But I knew that I could talk for ages about this topic I was really passionate about, and I didn't want to just create like a bunch of 10-minute videos that ultimately should have been one long video. Yeah. And so it kind of took a while, I think, for YouTube to become this place where, ironically, now we're in this time when everyone talks about the idea that people don't have a strong, as I forget what words are.
Attention span.
That's the one. We reach this period where people don't have a very, long attention span. And so people are talking about the idea of TikTok being very addictive. Like people are getting these like immediate dopamine hits at like 10 seconds at a time, flick, flick, flick. But simultaneously, YouTube seems to have this real flourishing of long form video content and podcasts as well. Like people will listen to really long podcasts. They'll put it on while they're like cleaning their house or something, and they will just listen to it. A lot of people, I know Khadijah, for example, is not moving because they still are going to have their videos on YouTube, but they are putting all of the audio from their videos on Spotify, because a lot of people have requested, oh, I'd love to be able to listen to your video essays like while I'm out and about or while I'm doing something, so I don't have to be sat watching it, but I can still kind of listen. And so I think I've kind of, where YouTube is at the moment is very helpfully exactly where I feel like I thrive the most, which is very long form content. Like a lot of my scripts are like 7,000 words long or more, because I also talk very fast. So I get a lot of words into a 40-minute video, and I have to actively slow myself down. I have like a method of recording that involves pre-recording the entire script, deliberately slowed, like where I'm really being careful with how slowly I'm talking, and then I feed it to myself as I'm recording so that I match my own speed in the recording, which is ironically enough a technique called recorded delivery that I picked up during my master's, which was in theatre. So it's all kind of come full circle.
You have covered a lot of topics in that one answer that I want to go into. No, that I want to go into more deeply. Like, completely agree with you. The video essay point, you're right. When we first met with Ali Jardine, we had this we had this whole chat about how no one was doing video essays on YouTube, and how it's just beginning to be a thing because YouTube's algorithms started prioritizing watch time, which led to video essays being, and the podcast style of longer content being far more encouraged by the platform, because also they could put more ads in it. Mm-hmm. So it worked for YouTube and worked for you, but there was so few people making that type of considered content, and it felt like you always wanted to do it. Do you think you're quite like inherently academic? Do you think that's where it comes from? Why do you think you wanted to do like long form video essays?
I think so. I remember us chatting about that because it was like some kind of secret clandestine meeting where I like I didn't officially qualify to have any kind of person at YouTube give me advice on my channel. But you were like, yeah, you should just come and chat with me for no reason whatsoever. And then I sat down and you were like, okay, here's what I'm thinking about your channel. Here's what I think would be really great. And it was like so helpful. But yeah, no, I think I am yeah, I guess naturally academic in the way I quite like doing research. I like sorting things into kind of paragraphs, points, ideas to move forward to an argument. I always like when I'm doing my videos to not come with a preconceived argument. I have what I think the point of the video will be and a topic. And then I'm like, okay, what does this actually look like? Which is the opposite of what I know a lot of people do with videos because because of the idea that, you know, title and thumbnail and this kind of thing is really important, like pulling people in with the title, making them curious, like all that kind of stuff. I know a lot of people who will deliberately like pick a concept, I guess, or like a catchy title, like not necessarily clickbait because it does deliver on its promise, but something that's a bit kind of an interesting, intriguing concept for the title. And then they kind of go through and shape the video around it. And I've tried to do that a few times and then I end up going on a weird tangent with my research, or it becomes too big, or it's just kind of a mess. So yeah, I tend to do the chat first and then message all of my friends and be like, what do I call this monstrosity? Like, what name does this get? What does the thumbnail look like? But yeah, no, I definitely think that I'm very bad at doing an essay front, like start to finish. I jump around so much and really just have no rhyme or reason to how I'm putting something together, but it eventually all comes together in the end.
Yeah. And one of the things I always loved about your approach to YouTube and your channel was you mentioned like having a master's, you were doing freelance work, like you definitely practice what you preach in terms of trying to enable and empower other people to have a voice in the way you've found yours. But while having full-time jobs, freelancing, doing your master's, you would make content that demanded so much time. So did that to land on your niche? Do you feel like you do have a niche channel. Do you feel like you found a niche, or do you feel like there's scope to just be anything you're interested in? Like, did it take you longer because you had so many commitments that you had to do because the algorithm monetization doesn't reward your type of content, sadly?
Well, so here's the thing, because I had all this other stuff going on that was actually paying me money, I guess there was less pressure with YouTube to decide like what I'm going to focus on. So I could just be like, yeah, sure, I'll make a video about something no one really cares about. And then, you know, maybe I'll make a video that coincidentally people really want to watch, there's a big audience for, but it wasn't that I was particularly making it with that in mind. Now that I'm full-time, that is something that I have to take into consideration of if I can produce X amount of content and I need X amount of money to how am I getting that money in? If I do want to pursue a video, because I tend to do like 1 or 2 videos a month, like it takes a lot. If I know that there's a video that doesn't have as wide of an audience, I'm gonna have to figure out where I'm supplementing my income that month. Like, am I going to try and get a freelancing gig somewhere? Am I trying to get some days doing something else? Am I like helping edit for someone? Like, I have to kind of make those decisions. And obviously that then takes more days out of the days that I've put aside for doing YouTube stuff. And what I was really conscious of, because I'd seen so many people absolutely burn out, which is that like when you are doing a full-time job and like loads of other hobbies and like volunteering here and there and doing YouTube on top of it, that you feel like you have to spend as much time as you were on everything on YouTube as well. And I'm like, actually, it feels very, I actually talked about this in a recent video. Like, it feels very silly of me to have this concept of what a good working condition is for someone else and feel very passionately about the idea of like the 4-day working week and a universal basic income and like all of these things that we've seen through studies have a hugely positive effect on people. And then to turn around to my own content and feel like I don't deserve that because I should just be working constantly. And like I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I realized that one of the things I needed to do was to bring on someone just to figure out at the beginning of the month, like, what does my schedule look like for the whole month, and just tell me like, hey, this is all you need to worry about on this particular day, like day to day. And we're still getting to the point where I I'm just working 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. Currently, that's too I have more things to do than that. And so we're trying to like get it down to the point where that's all I have to do, and I'm not working at weekends, and I'm not working in the evenings or anything like that. But there's still this weird sense of guilt of like, okay, I'm doing this thing that I was spending my free time doing and do enjoy, and now I'm doing it full time, so I should be like making myself sick with work like I was previously when I was in these kind of other full-time jobs that were not as healthy, just because that's what like you have to do to earn it. And I don't necessarily think that's that healthy for anyone, to be honest.
Yeah, that approach, like that toxic productivity, sounds like a fun theme. But do you feel like now YouTube's gone from being the thing you did in your free time because you were so passionate about making the content, now it's become your full-time work? Does it change the way you approach content and the way you feel about your channel? Because there's this ideal of being a full-time creator, but often I think people, I don't know, is there a mental shift where you start seeing it as work rather than seeing it as the thing you love?
So I think that that will probably depend on, if it is your full-time job, it means that you're making money from it. And I think it depends on where the money comes from, right? If you're doing YouTube, there's like various sources of money, and some of them won't be affected really if the general views on your channel drop off. Patreon is probably one of them, unless the views dropping off is to do with like you genuinely, your content isn't as good. You will still have that Patreon being pretty stable, because the people who have decided that they want to tip you for the content, that they want to support your content, are not going to go away because this sea of unsubscribed people who happen across your content when it went viral aren't there for the rest of your videos, right? So that's reasonably stable. AdSense, if that's a huge part of your revenue, if you have really high CPMs, or like you basically are getting kind of paid a lot for the views that you get, if that suddenly drops, that's a huge deal for you. Similarly with like sponsorships, if you are getting sponsors dependent on the view count that you get, and suddenly your view count drops, then that's a big deal. If, however, the sponsors, which I think more and more is kind of how sponsors are working, but I feel like for a long time, sponsors were much more concerned with your subscriber count in a way that I think they just didn't really get they were like, yeah, oh my God, this huge creator, big subscriber count, amazing. Even if you weren't getting as many views as maybe you should have been. Yeah. And so at that point, actually, yeah, it kind of didn't matter if your views dropped off, because you had this reasonably stable subscriber count that could just keep bringing it in. So like all of these different sources, and they're like other sources as well, do depend on those numbers. So it's not necessarily just a vanity metric to be like, oh, I'm like, my views have dropped off, or this isn't working. And I think it's why you see a lot of creators like talk about diversifying their income streams, because they know that if one thing drops, like they're kind of screwed in a way. If they put all their eggs in one basket, especially because they are beholden to like one platform, which is YouTube most likely, because I do still think that YouTube currently is providing the most kind of stable overall income for most creators. It feels like it's not going anywhere, and it also feels like it's has this very steady opportunities for income. And so I think it's like it has affected it in terms of me having to be aware of this stuff, but equally I'm more and more aware of like how I can try and help protect myself, so that I'm not put in a position where I have to start making stuff I don't want to make. Like at the moment, it's more, I have a huge list of ideas, and this is helping me to sift through the ones that have priority on my channel, rather than being like, oh, now I'm having to make a video about something I don't care about. If I got to that point, I feel like that's the time to say goodbye. But at this point, it's being kind of helpful in some ways. But I also don't want to get fully obsessed with the idea of like the YouTube studio like showing me exactly like, here's all the stuff that's gone wrong with this video, and it was like no one that used to like your videos is watching this video, and it's not a very positive place to go.
Out of your 10 most recent uploads, this is ranking 9th. You're like, great, brilliant, great.
So helpful. But I feel like it's really tough, because you both hate that metric, but when you know it's available, isn't there, it's really frustrating. even though you know you hate it. So like I've been doing some YouTube shorts recently, and I've had some really good feedback from people who are like, I love your content, but I don't necessarily have the time to watch like every single one of your video essays. And I'm like, that is fair enough, because those things are long. And YouTube shorts obviously very short. And so I'm able to do things like I've done a lot of recommended, like the LGBT teen movies to check out, or LGBT documentaries, or underrated movies, because it's not really worth for me doing an entire video on that when it's just a very short list that people can just like watch in 60 seconds. But when you upload a short on the YouTube studio, it doesn't show you your out of the last 10 proper uploads, this is how your latest video is doing. It swaps it to being the shorts version of that, which I don't really care about, to be honest.
No, you're like, I want to know how it is relative to all of my content, not just the shorts.
Exactly. Yeah. Or I just want to know about my normal content, because for shorts, like you can't monetize shorts, for example.
I know.
And at the moment, brands aren't really caring about YouTube shorts. And so for me, it's much more about providing something for my current audience interested in something like that, and like playing around with this kind of new feature and giving it a go. Like it's not what I actually need analytics on. But at the same time, I'm so aware of the fact that as soon as they then show me that list of like, how is my next video doing out of the past 10, I still hate that as well. So I'm like, will I ever be satisfied? Probably not.
Well, it's funny as well that you found a way to do short form content. So this is one of the questions I was going to ask you, because you talked about how you were really excited for long form content to be what the platform wanted, and it was the content you always wanted to make. And then you've got short form content on TikTok, and you make TikTok and YouTube shorts that is still trying to condense these topics into something that it's not really possible for them to be. And it must be, are you making entirely different content formats for that? Because I assume you don't want to try and shoehorn like a 30-minute video on queer coding into 60 seconds. So how are you approaching having demand on short form content and long form content both at the same time?
Yeah, so I very specifically, like TikTok was always a place that I didn't want it to become somewhere that I really had to be concentrating on, like, how does the algorithm work? How does the, like, the business of this work? I just want it to be a fun place where I just put stuff. And so that's why it has a lot of my other interests that don't really fit with my YouTube channel stuff. So like D&D things, cooking and food, just general silly stuff that just, it wouldn't make sense to put onto YouTube. YouTube, I think, feels a lot more like a portfolio, I guess, like a gallery, like here is me presenting my stuff. Whereas TikTok is not, it's very unsearchable. There are no titles. Like it's not like someone could look at your TikTok and really get a sense of what's going on, unless you're being really careful about like, okay, so I do these 5 types of series on TikTok and they're all labeled really clearly in the thumbnail and blah, blah, blah. Like it doesn't work the same way. And I needed a place where I could just be like, this is not something that I'm particularly interested in chasing to be monetized. Like if I've had some brands approach me interested in doing TikToks with me, and that's fine, but I'm not going to specifically start to like chase the algorithm with it. Whereas with YouTube, I know that like, although I won't be making that kind of content around like food or off the cuff stuff or whatever, like it's always going to be somewhat planned. I made like a long list of the types of content that I could make within shorts that would make sense, because they were like videos that I would make, but there just wasn't a video essay's worth of content around it, or stuff that's very snappy that I get asked questions about a lot. So I often get tagged in tweets or like posts or people talking about the term queer catching, because it's a term that I coined for a video essay a number of years ago, and people have been using it. I know a lot of people have used that video essay in their academic work. Like it's been kind of really exciting to see. And I was kind of secretly hoping for that video, because it was very much like essentially went over the entire history of the concept of queer baiting, from like queer coding and the Hays Code all the way through to what was happening at the time, which is what I kind of referred to as queer catching, which is sort of the opposite of queer baiting in a way, where instead of a TV show or a movie presenting a very queer relationship seemingly on screen and then denying it outside of the TV show, like you're just seeing things like, no, that's not there. Oh, is it? I bet you gotta check out the next season to find out.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite, where they say, Disney's first gay, we have super gay characters, come for the big gay moment. And then you watch it and you're like, if I didn't know that was meant to be gay, I would have missed it.
It's not what we were hoping to see on the screen when you're going to have such proclamation, and it's kind of like baiting.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like the kind of opposite of what we traditionally think of as queer baiting, but ultimately kind of for the same reason of like, we're able to bring in an LGBTQ audience while not alienating this anti-LGBTQ kind of more conservative audience. And so I was like, well, I get asked about this quite a lot. A lot of people tag me in tweets of someone saying like, oh, has anyone thought about this? Like, what's going on with this particular like phenomenon? And then people will be like, Rowan Ellis has a video on it. And I'm like, thanks, guys. But I was like, I really want a video that I can just point people to and link people to if anyone's interested or asks, I can just like send it over. And so, you know, definitions are really useful. Like 60 seconds is pretty easy to do a definition in. Recommendation videos are really good to do, I think, because some people will prefer to, you know, they see a video about the top 10 Oscar winners or something like that. They're going to just scroll down to the comments to the person who put the list of the movies and then just copy and paste that list and not watch the rest of the video, which, you know, isn't great for watch time. It feels like it could be more efficiently done in 60 seconds, to be honest. And then also I have just actually, one is going up tonight, which is, I'm tentatively thinking I might make into a series, see how it goes, which is like queer field trips. So I just did a video going to Gaze the Word, which is the UK's oldest queer bookshop and is amazing, has an incredible history. And actually in 60 seconds, you can pack that in, because it's like get someone curious, maybe get someone to visit, people to ask questions. So there's like, you know, exhibits at the Q&A going on at the moment that would be amazing. There's the LGBT Community Centre in London. So there's other things I could do in that series if I wanted to. So playing around with stuff that's less informal than TikTok, shall we say.
I like that it's still intentional. So like it shows that I mean, apart from the stuff on TikTok, which is like Rowan Unfiltered, on your YouTube channel, you seem to be very focused on knowing your topics you want to address, really, and considering that audience and how you can help your audience. But like, what impact do you want to have? Like when you were considering going full time, or when you were deciding on out of all these video essays, when you're prioritizing topics, what is the impact to have on your audience or the world, which is a broad topic?
I think that the most like emotionally impactful messages or responses that, especially as an LGBTQ plus, or I think probably this goes for any marginalized creator, is the people who contact you about the fact that they share that identity within like the context of my stuff, like people who have accepted themselves because of it, people who feel more comfortable talking about it, people who have felt more comfortable coming out, kind of all of these different things are incredible, and I feel like definitely have the most impact. And I think that even people with much smaller channels, like I remember when I was just starting out and I would still get those messages. I think even the most random video that you don't think is going to reach a lot of people, if people are searching for information about coming out, about being queer, about your experiences, like that is undoubtedly going to help them, because that's why they were searching for it. And so that feels like the most like emotionally impactful. But I also really enjoy getting comments from people who are like, I'd never thought about that way.
It's interesting because by critiquing representation in film and society, you have become some of the representation yourself, which is like, it's quite a responsibility. Like you're talking about people messaging you being like, oh, you know, you've helped me by existing. It must feel like, yeah, in some ways a lot of pressure. And I can tell in the way you interact with your community. So the way you are on Twitter, the way you are on Patreon, the way you are in comments, it's that like, I don't know if this word's right, but resilient educator. I can tell you really care about your community, and you acknowledge that by starting these conversations and being the face of these conversations, there's a whole cacophony of issues or potential identities that come from it. And you're very caring about the way you respond to your community, which I think is probably why Patreon's so important to your income stream as well, because it genuinely is, you know, you're putting a lot of effort into community. So how do you see that as like an educational duty, or do you see it as just something you're personally lucky to be able to cope with? How do you view it?
So I feel like I have been extremely lucky in that I look at the people who I was coming up alongside, who were making, I guess, similar kind of content to me, around all kinds of marginalized identities. And it is not lost on me the fact that, like, as a very sort of feminine presenting, cis, white, like middle class voiced woman, for example, there was a lot of stuff that I missed out on within that period that I had to see my friends go through. There was a lot of harassment, that we all got, to be honest, but that I did not get the brunt of. I had people make those really awful video responses and like send their followers over to my channel to be abusive and to harass me and stuff. But it wasn't the big players that were doing that to my channel. It was other channels that were doing it too. And so we see a lot of people who essentially have been like pushed off of YouTube who are making the same kind of content as me with just as much like thoughtfulness and care and community kind of focus, that just did not get their chance to continue to the point where it could be their full-time job, where they could feel safe and like have felt like their community really trusted them, and that really cared and that they cared back. And so for me, I think it's like learning and watching all that stuff happen to friends of mine and like having to be there for them, and having that frustration of like this entire wave, this initial wave that was coming up in like 2014 sort of to 2017, let's say, kind of disappear. And then now we have these people who feel like they've got these like big production values behind them and they are talking about this stuff. It has been pointed out. I feel like Kat Black is someone who has like weathered the storm. And she points out in videos and on streams, and she's talked a lot about the idea that like, if we look at the idea of like bread tube or left tube at the moment, which essentially is like a new version of the much more sort of scrappy stuff that was going on in kind of 2014 onwards, it's very white. Like it is. It's very has a very particular demographic to it, and that and also like doesn't really has, a lot of people treat it like it came out of nowhere, like it just like popped up one day with these big names and they were all incredible from the start and like we love them and it's great, and like these long form video essays, these huge budgets, these Patreons getting tens of thousands of dollars a month, just that's just what it is. Rather than acknowledging the fact that like there was a lot of people talking about this stuff beforehand, but they kind of got chased off the website before we figured out how to deal with it. So yeah, for me, I like see that and I'm like, I feel very blessed that I'm in a situation where I do have that kind of relationship, because my audience wasn't like kind of deliberately invaded by people who have these bad faith reasons to be subscribed to you, you know, people who would subscribe just so that they could dislike your video as soon as it was uploaded and write horrible comments, like just so that they could share it with a really horrible 4chan like Reddit community, so that people would flood it with negativity. Like that's something I've not had to go through personally. And so I think that really has put me in a position where I feel like I owe it to be able to be that person who can say, yeah, this person might be being slightly rude or saying things that are upsetting. Some people might find upsetting, but ultimately like they're not doing it for bad reasons. And I can deal with that. That feels like something I can do. And I also am a very strong believer in the idea that if you're looking at changing someone's mind fundamentally about something as big as like homophobia, for example, it's not a one conversation thing, right? Like no one has ever changed their, or like almost no one I think has ever changed their mind through one single conversation. Like I am just a tiny little drop in that bucket, and I might be the last drop that starts the bucket tipping over, or I might be the first. Like I don't know that, because it will take experiences with other people, like out in their lived experience, out in their world. It will take watching other pieces of media, reading books, starting to ask questions, talking to people they know, reflecting. Like it's going to be a long process to unlearn anything, and especially something as, you know, emotive and often as enforced within children so early as racism, as homophobia, as sexism. And so yeah, it's not putting the pressure on yourself to like be the one change, be the person who is like changing everyone's minds, but also like me being open to that responsibility so that it doesn't necessarily have to fall on people who have been through those experiences of harassment in a much more intense way.
And I guess that's the joy of YouTube in the search aspect of it, because with TikTok, unless you're really engaged in a niche, you don't get to see, like the bisexual pirate TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
Right, great. But unless you're engaged in that, that is not getting shown to people who are incels. That is not getting shown to people who reject preferred gender pronouns. That's, you know, that's not going to end up on their feed. Whereas with YouTube, at least there's a searchability. So, you know, if someone's, like you said at the beginning of their journey, they're trying to figure themselves out, or if they're searching for someone to hate, you will come up by the way. And it's like your videos are doing the job of educating over time without you having to proactively have those conversations directly over and over and over again. Which is quite exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to ask, because you talked about on the platform harassment, and there are lots of issues with YouTube that I think have forced some incredible voices off the platform.
Mm-hmm.
And YouTube's done a lot to combat it, like platform. However, the storm you have had to weather beyond, even if you've escaped most of the harassment, has been the monetization storm.
Mm-hmm.
I would love your thoughts on this, because we were talking about how your videos get demonetized all the time, because you are doing something, especially that I see as very social good, right? You're promoting an inclusive mindset, but because you get tagged as political or adult content, often you're still suffering, which I think the other reason people end up being off the platform. It's much easier to be resilient with harassment when you're at least making money and not worried about financial stress.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you found the money part of this was encouraging or discouraging as you've kind of been running your channel?
Yeah, so I remember when restricted mode kind of came to light. I very, very particularly remember, because I was in New York, and I needed to catch a plane. I had one last day in New York, and I was just chilling. I was just vibing in Brooklyn, and I was like, I'm going to get barbecue. I'm going to chill at a bookstore. I'm going to come back, pack up, get to the airport. And then I get tagged in a load of tweets being like, did you know that this is happening with your videos? I'm so confused. What is restricted mode? And basically these just random users had messaged me and then a few other of the UK LGBT YouTubers. So Callum, for example, I know was one of them, I think. And I looked into it, and basically the idea was on restricted mode, which was a mode that you could activate and that was activated by a lot of parents, teachers, basically people who were, monitoring the internet usage of their kids, of their teenagers. And a lot of our videos wouldn't show up at all. They were completely restricted, essentially saying this is not appropriate for young people. Videos that were, some of them, made specifically for young people. And we also would see disparities. So my friend Fiona had 2 different videos that she put up on her channel. One of them was a challenge of how well do I know my boyfriend, and one of them was a challenge of how well do I know my girlfriend. The girlfriend one was restricted, the boyfriend one wasn't. So it was becoming very obvious that the restricted mode maybe had something to do with gay stuff. And I was particularly attuned to this as an issue because my first kind of experience of stumbling into queer activism was as a teenager. My school's computer system blocked helplines and support sites like the Stonewall website, like the Albert Kennedy Trust, things like that. Specifically, it said on screen for lesbian and gay content. And I was incensed. This was before I'd come out even. And I was like, this is unjust. I was like, this is horrific. Can you imagine being a young person who is vulnerable, who's searching for these sites, who needs help, and is coming across the idea of not just as it blocked coincidentally, you couldn't even, kind of explain it away by being like, oh, maybe it's because it has some word that's restricted, some random word, it's a coincidence. It specifically said lesbian and gay content. So I was like, this is nothing new. We had Section 28 in the UK. We are now still having these bills being passed in places like Florida, for example, in the US. It is not some accident that this happened. And so I went back to the Airbnb. I didn't spend a long time in that bookshop. I swept right in. I got a notebook. I wrote on the train back what I wanted to say. And I made this video in the Airbnb, literally with 30 seconds to spare to pack up to go on the airport. I edited it in the car on the way to the airport. And when I was waiting for my plane, I posted it. I got on the plane. And when I came off, it was like I was being asked to do interviews with the BBC. It was kind of wild because I think this had been going on for so long, but it had been so invisible, because obviously if you're a young person who has this mode enabled by your parents, you can't see the alternatives, you can't see what you're missing. And it was only because this person had sort of accidentally been playing around with restricted mode that was like buried right at the bottom of the YouTube page that you'd have to scroll for ages to get to that point. And it was the kind of thing that was very much, would have been passed around the sort of mum's net of the internet, of being like, oh, this is like what you should be enabling on your children's accounts to keep them safe. Like those exact kids who would need the information, who are not going to get it from their parents, are the ones who've been kept from it. Yeah. And so that was like the tip of the iceberg, because then you would have all of these ideas of like, well, if people aren't seeing this, then they aren't going to be counting as views to be monetized. And then you had a load of people who were being demonetized for their queer content. You had a lot of people whose queer content was not making enough money, even if it wasn't demonetized. And so it just became this kind of spiral. And what was really difficult about it, I think, was that it was really hard to prove anything. Yeah. Because you can just say, like, anyone could say like, oh, YouTube is like censoring me, YouTube is suppressing me, they've like, shadow banned my account. Like you can say that, but ultimately you can't prove anything. And so I think that this was this thing where a lot of queer creators were feeling like they were going insane slightly, because they were like, I'm seeing this happen, but I can't prove what's going on. And so I've always been really careful to talk about the idea of like how demonetization works and all this kind of stuff. If you don't technically have proof, like causality and correlation and stuff can get very muddled, but you would see people who would do experiments where they would upload the same video and they would change the title to have gay in it or to not have gay in it. And mysteriously, the one with gay in it would be the one that got restricted or the one that got demonetized. And so when you individually look at that, you realize actually, yeah, this is what's going on. And I think that what's really important to note is a lot of people would blame it on like machine learning. Oh, it's the algorithm. It's like, it wasn't a person who's decided this, but it is, because a person was the one who coded that algorithm. The person wasn't the one that decided how these machines were going to learn. And so with restricted mode, for example, it said on the website specifically like how this worked. And one of the big factors was user flagging. So that is very easy to manipulate. That is very easy to see the kind of people who are going to be flagging content because they think it's inappropriate, the people who are kind of being scaremongered and being panicked about the idea of gay content at all. It's going to skew one way.
And the same people whose children need the resources, like you said.
Exactly.
And can't access it. Yeah. And I think I was working at YouTube during that time, and I think it was interesting because YouTube themselves were kind of like, oh, it's the algorithm, we didn't do this. But at some point, someone, whether it's an engineer, has put in a list of words, and even if they meant to put in a list of slurs, and gay was one of them, did not spot it. Partly probably because they weren't educated to look for it.
Exactly.
But that is still a human problem.
Yeah.
And it still then has massive implications on the finances and the voices that can be shaped in the future. People who are trying to make content and monetize that content to make a living, to then empower younger people or help educate them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that specifically, like, what is so interesting about this is we see it all the time with the actual material effects that can come out of a workforce not being diverse enough. So it's not just the idea of like, hey, maybe we should look into the fact, like, if you have people within a certain industry who all look the same, who all have the same experiences, maybe like we should think about why that is and look into the reasons why there might be gatekeeping, et cetera, et cetera. As just a general idea of, hey, is there a reason why this is a particularly good or negative job for a particular kind of person? Just useful to know in general. But it actually can have an effect beyond the idea of like, oh yeah, tick boxes, we need to make sure there's like one of every kind of nationality, every kind of ethnicity within this team. Like, we're talking about this for a reason, which is that if you have the development of medical textbooks, for example, and you don't have anyone who isn't white maybe being like, hey guys, it's kind of wild that we are only illustrating white people with these conditions, not just because I think like, hey, we need to be diverse, let's like have someone in here who's black, just because we're like really cool and diverse, but like specifically because skin conditions, for example, will look different on different colors of skin. And so if you're actually going to be training medical professionals in the future, you're going to have a huge impact on healthcare if you are not acknowledging the fact that, yeah, maybe they might be looking for different symptoms in different people. And with YouTube stuff, this is very similar. If you had people in that team who were queer, I could have told you immediately, hey, are we thinking of programming a restricted mode that's going to be machine learned based on user flagging? I do not think it would have taken me 2 seconds to be like, I see a flaw in this plan, everyone. Like, maybe we should be thinking about this. And it to be something to look for, and it to be something to test for, and something that was being monitored at least. And I think that that's like, it's just like a classic example of like a much wider issue within tech, and where you are putting in human biases, but then covering up with the idea of like, oh, it's just the machine doing it. And I'm like, but the human biases are going to come up. And the way that you cannot have a human being without bias, like that's not going to happen. But if you have a bunch of human beings who all have different biases and different whatever the opposite of biases is, like strengths, knowledge, experiences that can counteract that, you are going to get to something which ultimately is going to be a lot more useful, fair, actually be able to give people what they want in the search, and also block the stuff that's actually harmful to young people, like make the algorithm do its actual job, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's where every platform is going to have issues with this. And I think YouTube's were more public, but I wouldn't say that that's going to go away for TikTok. I think TikToks are going to be dealt with in a potentially less open way, but we still need to be aware and still call out platforms and monetization structures as that happens. So how has that changed your approach to monetization? So like you've just gone completely like create a full-time, published a book. How do you trust monetization sources, and how are you planning now? Does it make you feel more, sorry, this is a really personal finance question.
No, it's fine, please.
Design different strategies, or more skeptical of different platforms? Does it make you think you're going to get a job in the future again? How do you approach that?
So I'm not a risk-taking person whatsoever. At all, like at
You're
all.
very considered.
I'm very considered, very risk averse, and will plan everything to a T. I have a notorious Google spreadsheet, which is actually I think on my Linktree list, which is a Disney spreadsheet, because I made a spreadsheet of every single ride, every single place you can get food at Disney World, so that people could fill it in who I went on holiday with, so that like no one would go on holiday and not get to do something that they wanted to do because they were like too introverted or shy to bring it up in the moment that they actually really wanted to go on this ride, but like no one else did. So they were like, oh, I guess I don't have to, like, oh, I don't want to be annoying and bring it up. Like everyone just completed it on their own. Like this is how planned out I like to be. And so, you know, quitting my very stable day job to do creating full time, not me. But this was all something I was doing at the beginning of 2021, when we had just been through like a year of pandemic, and I had seen people like become redundant, lose their jobs, get dropped, the whole companies go under. And I was like, okay, here's the thing. I could fully just lose my job at any point. Like my company could just decide that the job that I do is not something they're interested in investing anymore, and I would be done. Like that can happen in the most stable job in the world. And increasingly, arguably, with the rise of automation, etc., like that more and more is going to be happening to like entire industries. And so I was like, well, the people that I know who are finding it difficult post YouTube, like they've done YouTube and it hasn't worked out for them and they're having to get a job. A lot of people who find it difficult, it's less that they're going from YouTube into a job and more that they never had a job before YouTube. They kind of were teenagers and then they were adults and they were just kind of making this money and they were like, well, hey, this is great. Whereas for me, I'm like, I've had an office job. Like I've been working since I was like 14 or something. And I've had like an office job for 10 years. Like I'm fine.
You know how to be professional. You know how to send an email. Like
yes, I've got that. And I know that like the skills that I have, like a lot of the skills I was using with YouTube were the reason why I got the jobs I got in offices in the first place, because I was working within social media. I was working within like video production, things like that anyway. So it's all kind of like melded and comes together. So for me, it's less of like I'm very confident that I can do this for the rest of my life. I definitely am not. I am fully aware of the fact that YouTube is an extremely young kind of industry, and even younger when it's if in terms of the time it's been producing full-time creators, and it could just disappear overnight. They could make a change to that algorithm. It could all go up in smoke. But the thing I do feel vaguely confident in is that if that does happen, I will be okay. Like, I will be able to try and find another job in the same way that if I had lost my job just through some other kind of accident of circumstance, I would be able to find another job. So that's essentially it. It's not like here's my story of how I figured out the monetization, problem, and I know what I'm doing, and like, here's the hack, guys. It's much more of like the world is falling apart, so you might as well decide how it falls apart for you. Like,
yeah,
that's
it's like you're either trusting a corporation or you're trusting yourself. Either way.
I was making videos in my last job, and I think that's partly what it was. Like, previous jobs I had were tangentially related, or they were a small part of it. With my job that I had, I was running events, I was running social media channels, I was creating videos, I was doing all of this stuff, but I was doing it for someone else. And I was like, could I be using this time to do this for me?
And then have a back catalogue of things you can monetize as well.
Exactly. And also there's a lot of stuff that I do that doesn't make any money. So Ruckus, for example, which, I mean, absolutely crying, sobbing that no one's been able to do in-person events for the last however many years, because right before this happened, we'd run 2 years of a very successful creative retreat. And me and Krish, who is my incredible, amazing co-creator of Ruckus, that essentially was like a multidisciplinary retreat that was just in the countryside. We went for 4 days, and we just facilitated very specifically very strong facilitation plans, because Jenny will know, oh boy, YouTube, bless them, but they cannot facilitate an event to save their lives. We had a lot of conversations about that while we were, as soon as we came out of every YouTube event, we were like, I can't believe they managed to get so many cool people in a room and do nothing about it. So yeah, we but that for me, like, we very specifically are not selling those tickets for a profit. Like, it's the kind of thing where if I had the contacts at, a load of guys who are in finance or whatever, I could run an event for them modeled off of Ruckus, but that wasn't what we were primarily wanting to do. We were basically making an event for our penniless creative friends and their
artist friends.
Exactly. Like the people with no money. And so we were like, okay, basically we're just gonna run it to cost. And people, we had like a sliding scale, we had free tickets that were sponsored. People could pay more than what the cost actually was if they wanted to support people who could only pay less. And so we made nothing from that, but that was something that was really kind of gratifying. So I'd like the idea that I can do enough stuff with YouTube and enough, brands can come on board and I do brand deals with them, or Patreon monetization or anything like that, that it means I can do those other things. So like even the book, for example, spoiler alert, everyone who's thinking that authors make money, they don't. In fact, having just come out of a job in publishing, authors in fact make the least amount of money, to be honest, of anyone, including like the interns at publishing houses. They do not make a living wage whatsoever. It is very difficult. There's like very particular industries, people who manage to work in, I would say, like thriller and romance, where they churn out like 2-3 books a year with a very particular format, and it just keep going, might be okay. People who can get themselves a load of school trips and school visits that pay okay, that's a big part of their income. But in terms of actually like the money you get paid to write a book, it's not a lot, gang. A lot of advances out here are like £5,000 to write a whole ass book.
You're like, I cannot live in London on that money.
It's like that is nowhere even close to minimum wage, like to the amount of time it actually takes to write a book. So all of those things that people do on top of that, like those aren't actually making money. And so for me, it's less about like, how can I make everything I do make money? And it's more what I've basically decided to do is plot everything that I want to do on a sort of graph in terms of like, how much money does it make? How much time does it take? How much like joy does it bring me? How much value does it give the world? And I'm like, I'm fine doing something that earns me no money and takes a ton of time if it gives me joy or if it does something really good for the world. What I don't want to do is be doing anything that does none of those things, because like, why would I be doing that? But I feel like so often we do, just because it's like, oh yeah, I guess this is just a thing I do to earn money. And I'm like, I want to, as far as possible, move to be in a position, like for me, that is the dream, is like, wow, what if I managed to find a way of earning money that involves something good? Wouldn't that be fun? You know,
happiness and good for the world. Good. Amazing.
I mean, ideally you do the thing that does all of them, right? So you do something that doesn't take a ton of time, right? That just uses up, you know, a nice little chunk of that ideal 4-day working week, makes you really happy, does good for the world, and pays well. If someone could find that, for me particularly, please forward me, send me an email. I'd love to hear about it. But yeah, that's how I'm trying to plan the way that I do like my working life, like especially knowing as well. I guess like the fifth thing would be that it's good for like profile building in some way. So it might help in the future, or it helps it basically helps for seeing myself as like, hello, this is Rowan who talks about this stuff and knows what she's talking about. So like doing training or going to places which give me more knowledge, like reading stuff that's going to help develop like my knowledge of the community, of our history, like that would be within there as well.
That makes complete sense. And okay, so this year you've published your book, which is great. Sadly, isn't going to make you a millionaire, sounds like, but maybe it will. Never know. You set a goal to get 200,000 subscribers by the end of 2022, and you've already got it, and it's April. You've gone full time. There's so much. I mean, ruckus might happen again because,
oh my God, fingers crossed,
restrictions are lifted. So, what is something you're really excited to achieve in 2022?
I have an idea that I'm talking to my literary agent about for a podcast, which would be my first foray into fiction, kind of more long form fiction. And so I have a pilot currently written, and I would really love to get to a point where we're pitching that, basically get to a point where that is going out to production companies and streaming sites, like people who might be interested in it. Because I think also like everything else that I'm doing is either like totally out of my control, like the subscriber count, for example, there's not really much I can do to change that other than doing what I'm doing, or is something that I'm already doing for work. It's not like an extra thing. It's like, I'd like to make X many videos. I'm like, cool, that's literally your job. And you kind of have to, but this is something where I'm like, there isn't an end goal that's confirmed, right? Like no one could want this and it could go nowhere. And so I don't necessarily have like an external source of pressure being like, okay, Rowan, and here's your deadline for that thing that's definitely going to happen. And so I think like trying to not just have this kind of written, but also just the amount of self-discipline it would take for me to actually do it alongside all the other stuff I'm doing when I'm this busy, feels like it would be a really special accomplishment for me personally.
I'd love to see that.
I'll send you over the pilot.
I mean, it makes sense for your fiction D&D link. So thank you so much for being here. This has been a joy, and I think we've gone into a lot of topics. So thank you so much.
That's the ADHD just springing all over the place, just really chaotic vibes.
Don't apologize, it is beautiful. It's like a butterfly on conversation.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to go on to quick fire questions, but
let's do it.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
An author when I was younger.
You've achieved it.
I've done it. Stamp.
Favorite animal?
Cats.
Favorite food?
Chocolate.
Favorite advert?
That Lily Allen, John Lewis ad from back in the day, the Christmas ad, absolutely made me weep. And it's still the best one. They've not topped it yet.
Favorite YouTube channel that isn't yours?
Already name dropped them, but I'm really enjoying Khadijah's stuff at the moment.
Last time you cried?
I watched Benediction at Flair Festival, which is a movie about Siegfried Sassoon, who was a war poet. And I love his poetry and his relationship with Wilfred Owen, both as like creative partners, but also as definite gay lovers, was already something I was interested in. So I was like, wow, why don't you just break me even further?
Next holiday you have planned?
I don't. I really want to, but true to form, I have made a Google form that I've sent to all of my friends to fill in to see who crosses over on potential holiday interest of various different like locations, times of year. So I do actually have a Google form waiting for me, which will tell me what my next holiday will be based on those answers.
You've crowdsourced it.
I've crowdsourced it, yeah.
And then final question was favorite brand.
That's a tricky one because I feel like brand versus like the actual product is slightly different. So I will say the thing right now that I'm using the most, I feel like I don't know anything about them as a brand, their branding, their like brand ethos, like anything like that. But the thing that I'm using the most and I'm finding the most useful at the moment is Notion. For my ADHD especially, it has been super, super helpful. And so I also happen to be friends with Taha, who literally does Notion as a job. And so took me through this brilliant tutorial of it as well. So that was also very helpful. But yeah, no, I feel like I have zero clue what they're like overall as a brand, as a company, but the actual product I'm obsessed with.
I have to add this one in because I actually don't think we actually asked it, but favorite film.
It definitely changes. It's always probably gay, but I will say right now, The Handmaiden, is flawless. It's incredible. If you are under 18, I instead recommend Pride. But those are my two if anyone's looking to watch a movie that's very good.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate all your time.
Thanks for having me.
And I've seen Pride, love Pride, but I haven't seen Handmaiden, so I'll check it out.
Jenny, it's so good.
Pride makes you cry all the time. So
oh yeah, The Handmaiden will give you every single emotion you've ever had in your life instead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and the cat making a guest appearance.
Yes, you did. Well done, them.